We're here today filming for the Hamilton College Jazz Archives. I'm with Dr. Michael Woods from our faculty, and we have the pleasure of the company of Mr. Junior Mance, who is a veteran pianist, teacher, composer, expert on the blues, and it's a great pleasure to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'd like to start off asking you what you're up to now.
Well, now I'm up to several things. I'm still performing with my own trio, and I'm recording for Inja Records. Inja, they pronounce it. It's spelled E-N-J-A. Over here they say Inja.
Yeah.
But in Europe they say Inja. And also I've been, before that I just had in fact I had two records come out at the same time, one on Inja and one on chiaroscuro. You know,
Which we have with us today.
oh, you do?
Yes, for your autograph.
But I'm contracted to India now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and I just got back from Japan on a tour that's called 100 Gold Fingers. It features 10 piano players.
Oh, my.
Yeah, Hank Jones, John Lewis, Kenny Barron, Ray Bryant, Gene Harris, Joanne Burkeen, Roger Calloway, and who I left out, Cedar Walton, and myself.
Man,
And there was one more. But 10 of us. Anyway.
sounds great.
Yeah. And it's a tour we make every other year. It's sponsored by Fujitsu, you know, it's a big computer company. And it's really a nice thing, too. We play nothing but concert halls, you know, and we get the best pianos, and mostly Steinways, believe it or
How many of you
not.
play at once?
Never more than 2 at a time.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. They have one bass player and one drummer. Bob Cranshaw is a bass player, and Alan Dawson usually is the drummer, but he went in the hospital shortly before we left. I think he's going to be all right, though. And Grady Tate made it this year. And the way they do it, you know, like 6 guys will play alone. I mean, each one of them will play alone for about 12 or 15 minutes with the rhythm section, you know, which usually makes up about 2 tunes. And then there's an intermission. Then there are the other 4, there are 2 piano duets, you know, with or without the rhythm section at their own desire, you know, whatever they want to do. And it changes up every night. The next night there's a different 6 in the front and a different 4, and it goes on like that. In the finale, we usually choose a composer. It's usually Ellington. And sometimes it's just standards, you know, well-known standards. And everybody will play 1 or maybe 2 choruses of their favorite by that composer. And it ends up with Ray Bryant doing real, for want of a better term, hot rendition of Take the A Train. When I mean hot, he does it with a boogie-woogie bass and then the rhythm section. And it's really a great finale, you know, a great way to end it. And they videotape it every year, and they record it. It comes out in a double CD. Every other year, I should say. That's when we go and do that. And that's one that we all look forward to. You know, it's and it's the good thing about it. There are no ego problems at all. You know, usually when you get a bunch of all-stars, you know, you're going to get some kind of egos, like, you know, who's going to get top. None of that. It's like a team. You know. Yeah, you know, we not only are playing together there, but we're like hanging out together, you know, away from the concert hall and everything. It's really a nice thing, and they make everything just so great for you. The travel conditions are all first class. Yeah. The hotels are all first class. You know, the tour is usually 3 to 4 weeks. You know, it was about 4 weeks this year because they added Seoul, Korea, which is getting in on the jazz thing now. You know, and in fact, I was told that the only big jazz thing they had before that was the Philip Morris Super Band. I know you're familiar with that, aren't you?
I've heard of that, yeah.
Yeah, and that was the last time they had that was 2-3 years ago. So they had this marvelous performing arts center on the order of Lincoln Center here, you know. But the main hall, which holds about 3,500 people, had standing room only. You know, and you would have thought it was a rock concert, the way they responded, you know, just straight ahead jazz. And it was really wonderful. You know, so new ground has been broken in Korea.
That's great.
Yeah. And then I've been working with another group called Lionel, Hampton, and the Golden Men of Jazz, which is an eight-piece all-star group. It changes from time to time, but usually it's Al Gray on trombone, Clark Terry and Harry Sweets Edison on trumpets, James Moody, usually on tenor saxophone, Grady Tate, usually on drums, and Milt Hinton or Jimmy Woody on bass. You know, and that's, I say golden men because we're all over 60. I think that's the criteria for being a member of this group.
Yeah.
But they do mostly all the jazz festivals in the summer. We were canceled this year because Lionel had another mild stroke just before we were supposed to leave. He's okay now. He's out of the hospital. And but he's a tough old man. He's 87 years old, and that was his second mild stroke since March, and the third in the last 3 years. You know, and he's doing two things. You know, he's still got his big band going. The 29th of this month, he's going to do a gig with his big band.
Jeez.
I said, oh boy, I hope he doesn't have another one.
Yeah.
Because we're supposed to do some things in September. We're going to, there's a big jazz program at the Hollywood Bowl in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
And they're also going to honor him again at the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C. And then, other than that, well, when school starts, I'm a part-time teacher. Now, I should add, whenever I'm there, I teach.
Yeah.
You know, because the faculty is made up of working jazz musicians, and it's what they want. It's what most of the schools around here have. And so it's even in our contract, if we have to take off to for a tour or a job or something, we're free to do so. Just provide a substitute, which is very easy. You know, usually we're able to get somebody in-house to do it.
Oh, yeah.
But we can get someone from outside. It's,
Right.
you know. And I like that. I've been doing it for 6 years. I teach a blues class. You know, and it's a lot of fun. First I declined. I said, no, I'm not a teacher. I'm a college dropout. You know, I said, I don't have the credentials. They said, good. We don't want teachers. We want performers. I said, because we don't want to turn out more teachers. We want to turn out performers. So most of the classes are performing. You know, very little textbook work. You know, in fact, there are hardly any. The only textbook they have is this so-called, I know you're familiar with it, Mike, the real book.
That's the textbook. Oh, that's great.
But we have to explain to them, listen, just use this as a guide because there are many, many wrong changes in the real book, you know. But it's the best thing for them to go on, really, you know. It provides a guide for them to go by. Anyway, that's the textbook, you know.
Let me ask you a question about this blues class. Tell me some of the things you teach people to sensitize them to play the blues with us.
Well, that's the big problem, sensitize them to play the blues. Well, to begin with, they have to be sophomores to take this class. Well, to get into the blues program, they have to have a musical background anyway. Everybody's auditioned. You know, you can be a hell of a classical musician or something, but if you don't know the basics about playing jazz, you know, they tell you, well, go and get that together and then come back. Yeah. So, as I said, but when they asked me to do it, I said, how do you teach anybody to play the blues? They said, oh, I'm sure you'll find a way. You know? But what I do, I usually start off to see if they know all the forms, like the 12-bar blues form, or the 8-bar blues form, 16-bar blues forms. You know, and I go by, you know, like from what I've heard different blues singers, the structures that they sing off mostly, you know, are the old timers. And I make up chord sheets, you know, and I pass them out to everybody so that they'll have them. You know, can get familiar with them. Like there's many 12-bar blues forms. There's a lot of them. There's the minor blues, and there's 3 or 4 different kinds of minor blues forms, you know, and 3 or 4 different ways of doing the major blues. And I start with that, and which usually doesn't take long because usually they are advanced enough to know that, and they have no trouble reading the chord sheets. And the rest is all performing, you know. And there's usually 2 or 3 singers in the class. And I use a lot of records. I bring records to class. We have the equipment there, you know, to play records or CDs on. And usually, I've been lucky so far. Most of them, when they get there, they know what they want to, where they're going. They know what they want. They're not just strictly a neophyte as far as the word blues is concerned. You know? And so it's, and I love it. They told me, said, well, try it for a few weeks. You know, and if you don't like it, we'll understand. I've been there 6 years. I'm going to my 7th year now. And it's really great.
How did you learn about the blues?
I grew up in Chicago.
Okay.
That's a big blues town, isn't
That's
it?
right. It always has been.
Yeah.
You know, they talk about Chicago blues. Nowadays, I think it's a misnomer. I'm not putting down the guys who are doing it now, you know, but the Chicago blues was really when I was growing up, because that's when people like Memphis Slim, Muddy Waters were still living there in Chicago. You know, and they had all the joints on the South Side. And I don't use that word loosely. I mean it, joints, like what they were playing in, you know. And they had all these great blues singers, and they were recording too, you know. Just a shame that they got recognition so late in life. You know? Yeah, now it's a big thing, and now they're superstars and superheroes. You
But
know?
not that many of them are still here.
That's true too.
Yeah.
B.B. King, I'm glad he's still around. B.B. King has opened a blues place, a blues club in Los Angeles that's doing fantastic. You know, and he has all the guys, some of the forgotten guys. He'll give them a booking there. You know. And in Chicago, Buddy Guy has a club there also. Now, you know, and they're they call it Chicago blues, but they're mostly youngsters who, when I listen to them, most of them are imitating. Some are influenced. You know, there's a difference in being influenced and imitating. But they're still young, and I don't know, maybe because when I was growing up, I heard that real gut bucket thing, you know, and that's what I'm missing, you know, when I listen to them now, you know, in Chicago. I did a record date once. Why they asked me to be on this date, I don't know, with Buddy Guy and Junior Wells. Junior Wells is the harmonica player, blues player. And these guys were so earthy, so steeped in the blues. I thought I knew everything about the blues. That's the only time in my life I ever felt inadequate playing, you know. And but it was fun though. And the record sold a lot. It's called Buddy and the Juniors. It's just been reissued on CD also. You know, and but I stayed in the background as much as possible because they were playing the as they say, the show enough blues.
I mean, did you feel like you had too much? I don't know how to put this. Too much knowledge from your bebop playing, or
that could be it. I felt like I was playing too much because, you know, like when you get in the habit of playing like the modern changes, or as you say, bebop, it doesn't fit with what they're doing. You know, what they're doing, you gotta think 1 3 5. You know what I'm saying? All the time. You know, you don't deviate from that 1 3 5 or 1 4. You know, you stay in that bag all the time. You know, you can't play those slick changes like Charlie Parker was playing. You know. I mean, not that kind of music, you know.
I want to ask you something.
Sure.
Do you feel that, you know, you have to sometimes trade off usages of specific parameters? For instance, if you didn't have all that harmonic sophistication, but you had to endow the music with something, you would do more with the subjective realm, more bending of notes, more blue notes.
In the realm of the blues, yes, I think so. Yeah.
You know, you trade off one thing for the other.
Yeah, you have to. Yes. Yeah, because when I was with, I think it was Atlantic Records, they threw another curve at me. So the curve was this. What was her name? She was a gospel singer, Marion Williams. Used to have a group called the Stars of Faith, and she was strictly out of the church, you know. And so they were making, it was strictly a gospel album, wasn't a jazz album, you know. And So Bill Fisher, who's an arranger around town, very good arranger too. He did just some simple charts and outlines, like chord things. And he had to keep telling me, don't play the 6, leave the 6 out. Stick to the 1, 3, 5, the church chords. And that is hard to do when you're used to doing it, and I would just do it without thinking. I said, oh boy. Every time they had to do another take, it was my fault that they had to do it,
You had to tape one of your fingers together with the other one.
And I don't know why they have this idea that I played in the church. I never played in the church, but they think because I play the blues a lot, because I like the blues, I love the blues, But they think that I had to come out of the church. No, I never played in church.
Okay, now this is a misnomer, but a lot of people just take it for granted that almost, I'd say 70% of today's African American talent came out of the church.
Yes.
Now I'm one
That's
that
true.
did, but not always. And then another thing, you said this. They said because you played the blues, they thought you played in church.
Yes, they always think that one spins off the other.
One guy said it like this, and I want your take on it. He said the only difference between gospel and blues is one guy's talking about God and one guy's talking about his girlfriend. They said God and girlfriend. And one guy
he's right.
And one guy talking about God is good to me, and the other one talking about my old lady put me down.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But it's the same chords.
Yeah, the same chords, but in a different voice, different way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're saying different things.
But then there are people too. Like I worked with Dinah Washington for 2 weeks. She played in the church. And sang in it too. She also played piano. Because it's a good thing about working with her. She would sometimes show me what chords she would prefer to others, but they were never like just a simple 1, 3, 5 type chords. She knew the others too. And Sarah Vaughan was another one who played and sang in church, and yet she was a piano player once. A lot of people don't know this. In Earl Hines' band, when he was conducting. She's a piano player and singer, but he usually had like 2-minute pianos back to back. I remember in Chicago, I went to see him, and they had that,
Well, I was listening to an interview of yours on one of your records at the Jazz Speak, and you were talking about how you learned from your father, and
in a sense. Yeah, my father never played piano professionally. When I was, I guess around 5 years old, we moved to this apartment in Evanston, which is actually where I grew up, the suburbs of Chicago. And whoever was there before us just left this big old upright. Big, 2 uprights, we're like about 6 feet tall, things like that, It was probably too big, and the person didn't want to be bothered with, moving it elsewhere. So my father had a good ear for music. He liked music. He listened to, he was very fond of big band music, like especially the Basie band. That's, he thought there was no other band like the Basie band. And blues. My mother was more partial to blues, So my father would just fool around on it, and he started taking lessons because by coincidence, the guy that lived down the stairs under us was a piano teacher. So he taught my father a few of the basics, my father would do it, and I would just listen to him, and not even thinking about playing the piano. So when he was at work in the daytime, I would go to the piano with one finger, and pick out these melodies, And one day he came home early, and there I was, and he was listening, So, when you're a little kid, you don't know if you messed up or, or what. So right away I said, Dad, could I take piano lessons? I'd like to learn how to play the piano. And it floored him. Like, what kid asks their parents if they want to take lessons, And so he did, but he found me a better teacher than the one down the stairs. The guy down the stairs was more or less just taking people's money, He was just teaching people that just wanted to know, they could send for these books, learn how to play in 5 easy lessons or something.
Right.
Yeah, and so I went on from there. I really got to like it. And I had a great teacher. In fact, my first piano teacher was the best of any teacher I ever had. He died a few years ago. He was more or less a cocktail lounge type piano player, But the knowledge he had, his heroes were like Art Tatum, Teddy Wilson, and Earl Hines, in that order. You know, so those were the guys that I heard early, you know, in my career. And so what better three to listen to start off, you know? And he would play the records, you know, like 78s back in those days, you know. And they also put out these books, you know, their solos, which some of them were impossible to read. You know? I'm still not the greatest sight reader in the world, you know. I tell the guys that I read, but it's more like spelling. But anyway, we went from that, and then my mother, liking the blues so much, she had all the boogie woogie records, you know, like by Pete Johnson, Albert Ammons, Maid Lux Lewis, who also were living in Chicago then, those three. You know, and ironically, I got my bebop chops from Albert Ammons' son, Gene Ammons. I joined this band when I was 17.
Oh, the sax player.
Yeah, right.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. But anyway, and so for a while there, I guess almost to the time I learned bebop, I was a boogie-woogie piano player.
Wow.
You know, and not exclusively though, because I remember when I was about 12 years old, I guess, we had moved to another place. My father took the piano with him too. He didn't leave it. And upstairs over us, there was a saxophone player who had a gig on weekends. And his piano player got sick, and got sick like just before the gig. Now there was only 3 pieces: piano, drums, and saxophone.
Wow.
You know, now he had to have something, you know, to fill in for the piano. So he didn't know what to do. So he asked my father. He says, "Let me take Junior on the gig." You know, just I guess he figures, well, just so long as somebody's there. It wasn't a jazz club. You know, it was like one of those they used to call road houses. You know, out on the highway. You know, and nobody's paying that much attention anyway. So I went, and that night he taught me how to accompany, you know, the horns and everything. It was a style they call boomchang, you know, like boom chang, 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 chang. You know, that was the type of accompaniment. And he showed me the chords to play, because most of the things he played were either blues chords or I Got Rhythm. You know, which are the basic things all jazz musicians should learn to begin with.
Right.
Yeah. So I learned it then, and I wound up keeping the gig all summer.
Wow. And you were how old?
12. Well, when school opened again, no, I couldn't do it though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
But I learned a lot though, you know, and then I learned other tunes too. You know, they're getting away from the I Got Rhythm and the blues thing.
Wow.
Yeah, and then along came bebop. Why did he ever teach me that? I haven't been the same since. Still trying to learn.
Wow.
Tell us, you did some work with the Adderleys.
Yeah, I was in the Army with Cannonball and that.
First of all, I got to say, if I had to pick a quintet that just to me had a beautiful jazz feeling and a beautiful soul feeling, it would be the Cannonball Quintet.
You know, it's strange you mentioned that, because just last week, Verve Records called me and sent me 2 cassettes. They're going to reissue. They bought the catalog, I think the old catalog from Mercury, on those sides that we did that you're talking about, and they're going to put them out in a double CD.
Oh, great.
You know, and they sent them to me to listen to and clarify, like some of the. There were a lot of errors as far as composer credits and things like that, and that's why they sent them to me, along with the sheet with the thing on it. And, it was like, which I had those records once. I had them in vinyl. A couple of them I got back because Mercury reissued a couple of them themselves, you know. But it was really great to hear them again, you know. It was like a nostalgia thing. Yeah. It's going to be 2 CDs featuring, like, I think 3 albums, Cannonball, Sharpshooters, and Nat's album, To the Ivy League. And there was one more. Cannonball en route, I think is the name of it. Yeah. And but anyway, I was in the Army with those guys. Yeah. And that's a funny story too. I couldn't get into the Army band because I didn't play a marching instrument. You know, back then,
Oh,
to get
yeah.
into an Army band, you had to play a marching instrument. So I was slated to go to Korea, you know. So the basic training, you know, they give you a rifle, empty rifle, and, you know, teach you how to walk guard duty. So the post they assigned me was around the service club. And while I'm walking around it, I hear this great music. I say, wow, some fantastic records. You know, I thought, just assumed it was records. You know, I wouldn't expect to hear anything like that on an Army post. You know, and I was walk slow every time I, you know, got past and walked behind, you know, where the music was coming from. I'd walk very slow, you know, and you know, the way you walk guard duty in the Army, you walk 2 hours and rest 1 hour. And I said, well, during our rest period, I'm going to listen to some music, because I was in, I guess, about my 6th week of basic training. The only thing I heard musically, it was 5 o'clock in the morning, these hillbillies waking up with these twanging guitars on
Oh,
these little
my God.
transistor radios, you know, and fights breaking out. Turn that stuff off. You know? Yeah. So anyway, when my rest period came, I ran back to the service club. And when I ran inside, I looked, and there's this big band sitting on the stage. This roly-poly guy leading it and playing alto. And I stopped, and I was frozen. You know, I listened. I just ran up to the stage then, and I listened to a couple tunes. And something I never do is ask to sit in. I always wait to be asked, you know. But then I couldn't hold back. I said, hey, man, can I sit in the band? So the piano player, I was standing near him, and he heard me. So he reaches down off the stage and pulls me up and says, yeah, man, come on, play. And he disappeared. But the piano player was a clarinet player who just knew some piano chords, you know. And he had a date in Louisville. This was in Fort Knox, Kentucky. You know, and he was late for his date, you know, having to play this gig, you know. So he disappeared then, you know. So there I am sitting there, and they've all got civvies on, because, you know, during the Korean War in the States, after 4 o'clock, you could put your civilian clothes on, you know, on any Army post in the States, not overseas. But I'm sitting there, you know, I'm walking guard with combat boots, helmet, cartridge belt, you know.
Jeez.
And so
Oh, that's great.
Cannonball's giving me like, such a look of disdain I've never seen in my life, you know.
Wow.
Wow, who is this kid, you know? And the rest of the guys in the band are looking and say, huh? You know? So Cannonball asked, he says, what do you want to play? I said, well, play anything out of your book. And by saying it like that, you know, that kind of caught him by surprise. Said, well, maybe the guy is a musician, you know. So they called an easy tune, easy bebop tune with blues changes. You know, they played the head, and then they gave me the first solo. Cannonball said, all right, you got it. So what did he say that for? You know, here I haven't been near piano in 6 weeks, you know. I just played, and I stretched out, and then he starts like, yeah, man, go ahead, play some more. You know, and I looked, and I happened to look up at the rest of the band, and I see heads going like
All
that.
right.
There you go.
And after a while, I say, yeah, man, go ahead. I must have played about 99 choruses, you know. Then the band came in, you know, and I read the charts and all,
That's
you know.
great.
And so after that was over, Cannonball comes over to the piano and says, yeah, man, that's great. He says, what's your name? I say, Junior Mance. And Sonny Stitt was one of his heroes then. And I had, you know, worked with Sonny and Gene before I got drafted. Sonny Stitt and Gene Ammons, the group they had, you know. So he laughs, he says, ha, ha, ha. He says, if you're Junior Mance, what are you doing here in those clothes? I said, what are you doing here?
Nobody was there by choice, right?
Yeah. So we had a big laugh about it, and then he says, you coming to the band, I guess? I said, no, they won't let me. This is because I don't play a marching instrument. So I finished the night, but that happened to be their last set, that last hour, you know. So the next day was the day that I'm on the infiltration course. You know what the infiltration course is. That's when you're out in training and they shoot machine gun bullets 3 feet above the ground. Well, the guns are fixed so that they can't do that, you know.
Yeah.
And usually it's on dry ground. Well, this day they chose to take hoses and make it real muddy. You know? And you don't stand up, you're gonna crawl, believe me. So when we got to the end of the infiltration course, I saw this Jeep. And I got close, I said, that's Cannonball. You know, and he goes up to the first sergeant and hands him a slip of paper, and the first sergeant just looks at it and says, okay, man, stick off, they want you at headquarters. The first sergeant was a big, dumb redneck. I can't even forgotten his name. You know? I don't think he could read. You know, he just glanced at it, make it look official. All right. You know? So I jumped in the Jeep with Cannonball, and as soon as we got out of earshot, he says, "Okay, now listen carefully." He says, "These orders are phony." Oh. I said, "Oh, Cannon, come on! I didn't come to the Army to go to jail. I was late getting there anyway because I was on the road with Gene and Sonny." You know? He says, "Trust me." You know. I said, "What choice have I got?" You know? So then he says, "We're going back to the barracks, and I want the band director to hear you." He says, "Maybe we can do something, pull some kind of strings to get you in the band." I said, "Oh, great." I said, "Oh, I'm for that," you know. So we went back. And the band director didn't know about anything but marches. He was like a career soldier anyway. He was getting out, unfortunately, you know. And all he knew was marches. He didn't know anything about jazz. So Cannonball had stacked the deck. When we got back to the area, to the barracks, I didn't know he had told the guys, "Now, when Junior starts playing, whoop it up." Say, "Yeah, pat your fingers, you know, snap and make it look like, you know, he's good, you know." So I got back, and the band director says, you know, the usual things like your name and how long you've been in the Army and so forth. He says, "Well, play something. Let me hear you play something." He says, "Well, what should I play?" He says, "Oh, play anything, anything." You know. So I just started playing some blues, you know, the tempo like that, you know. And sure enough, the guys jumped in. You know? And so he's standing there, you know, like a real soldier, with fingers in the belt, and he's looking around at the reaction of the guys, you know. So I went through about 2 or 3 songs, you know, and so he gave me one of these backhanded compliments I got. He says, "Well, you must be good. They think you are." Thanks a lot. So then Cannonball forgot to brief me on the important question. And he asked me, and I didn't know how to answer it. I just had to answer it truthfully. He says, "What's your other instrument?" I said, "I'm sorry, I only play piano." He says, "Oh, that presents a problem." You know. So back to training I went, and then the guy did make arrangements with my sergeant to let me get off the nights, like about 3 nights a week that they played the service club, to go and play that, you know, and I did. So one night I came, when I reported that to the service club to play with the guys, and they were looking a little bit downhearted because the drummer had gotten orders to ship to Germany. And he was a good drummer. They hated to lose a good drummer, but also he was the company clerk, who, you know, which is they do all the administrative work. He's the next thing under the first sergeant, you know, and he usually knows everything, you know. And I found out later why they wanted a company clerk, you know, that they could really stay tight with.
Yeah.
You know, because he would warn them of impending inspections or like that, you know.
Wow.
And so. I asked Cannonball, I said, "Well, that's a full-time job, isn't it, in the daytime?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, how do you do that?" He says, "Well, first you have to know how to type." I said, "I can type. I learned how to type in high school." You know, and right away you could see light bulbs lighting up all over. Just, "Oh, yeah?" So they got busy. You know, make a long story short, they got busy with the band commander and with everybody else and pulled strings. Got me out of basic training, and I had to go to clerk typist school for 8 weeks, you know, to learn Army administration. But they still let me work at night with the band, you know. So that's how I got in, you know. And you know, it's something I'll never know. The basic training outfit that I was training with was sent to Korea, and I only met 4 guys that came back out of this group. I understand that our whole company was absorbed into the 24th Infantry Division, which got caught in a hell of an ambush over there, you know. And I wonder, you know, like, you know, I sort of think that Cannonball might have saved my life. You know, if it wasn't for him, I might not be here. You know?
It's such a great story, and we've had,
it's a true story too.
People other folks we've talked to, Al Gray, and they all have little stories like that their whole life like took its turn because of a fortunate circumstance or someone stepping in and doing something good for them.
Or just the fact that the piano just happened to be there.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
He could have been playing without a piano.
Wow.
Real briefly, tell him what Benny Powell said about the trombone.
Oh, yeah. Benny Powell's a young man, a boy.
Oh, I know Benny
Yeah.
quite well. Yeah.
He was talking about being at, was it Uncle's house?
Uh-huh.
And he just happened to lean back and like a kid, there's this trombone sitting back there. And what's that, And that was that was the whole his whole start. Because he'd been playing drums, I guess.
Really?
The bass drum, he said.
Yeah.
It's great.
Well, they tried to teach me the bass drum, and once I got into the Army, too, like to make it look good, they had to put down something.
Yeah.
I had to show so that I played something else.
Wow.
So one day, they got a small nucleus of the band to go out and play, troops that are finishing basic training. On their last day, part of the band will go out and meet them and play for them to march back to the company area. Sort of give them a spirit. Well, this is over now,
Uh-huh.
So it's all right, Mance, we're going to try you on a bass drum. They figured that's good enough to try. So I said, okay, I was for it. I said, that's easy, So what I didn't know that, what happened was we're marching back and everything is cool till we come to this big hill and it's windy.
Uh-oh.
So we're going up and I'm keeping the beat. So just imagine what's happening. Like, boom, 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 boom. And it got slower and slower. So the cymbal player, the guy who was playing the cymbals, and drummers, whoever the drummer, they're supposed to play all of those instruments anyway, like in the Army. So he says, he runs up, he says, Mance, give me the bass drum. You're going to have the guys crawling in a minute. He said, take these cymbals. I said, so what I do with them? He said, just hit them together, So now, the only thing I'd seen playing cymbals before that was in the, was 1812 Overture, where there's a big clash. I ran back and took a good lick. Wham! And you never saw guys scatter. The band was so
Incoming.
So the guy said, he said, just put them on your arm and carry them.
Oh, man.
So that was the only time that I ever played in a formation. There was one other time, but I didn't dare play. I was a company clerk by this time, and 2 years in a row, both years, the bands from Fort Knox and from Fort Breckenridge, and all the camps in Kentucky, played it, between races at the Kentucky Derby. See, and I really wanted to go to the Kentucky Derby, and this was the way to go, without paying and just hang out all day, So they had two cymbal players. They used the whole band, So they said, Mance, don't you dare even try to play it. You just carry those cymbals. I said, don't worry. So I just marched carrying the cymbals, marched into Churchill Downs.
Wow.
Only drag was I was stuck with holding them all day.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, when I think about my Army experiences, Beetle Bailey had nothing on us.
Wow.
You talk about what I was saying about the company clerk usually had the inside scoop on what was going down, Well, one day they called in, they call the IG inspection, Inspector General, that comes around like once or twice a year, unannounced, and they go to different camps, and inspect to see if, things are on the up and up, and the barracks are neat and clean. So our barracks and our band, as I say, the Beetle Bailey had nothing on us. Cannonball and I were roommates. We had a room because I was a company clerk and Cannonball was a sergeant. He was over. They had a band training unit also, and he was the head of that. So in our room we had 2 record players, about 100 albums, or all kinds of records,
Wow.
We had hot plates because when we got off the gig at night, in the service club, we'd run back, and Cannonball was a good cook, He'd open up cans of corned beef hash,
There you go.
Smell would wake up everybody else in the barracks, And everybody had all kind of stuff they shouldn't have had. We were allowed to have 2 lockers, 2 tall lockers, one for your Army clothes and one for your civilian clothes. Cannonball and I had 4 apiece. You know? And everybody else had at least 3, you know. So, but you're only supposed to have just a certain amount of civilian clothes, you know. So I got on the intercom and said, hey guys, IG is coming, you know. So everybody had a car, and the parking lot was just, you know, right outside the barracks. So everybody backed their cars up to the door, and we just shoveled everything that we weren't supposed to have into the trunks of these cars and put them back on the parking lot, you know. And they had it together as far as getting the barracks together like that, you know.
Yeah. Wow.
And when the IG showed up, sure enough, everything was in order, you know. But the funniest thing was after he left, everybody backed the cars up again and sorting all this stuff out. You know? We just put it in anybody's trunk, you know.
Yeah.
So, you know, it doesn't matter. We sort it out later. You know?
That's great.
Yeah.
Does some of that stuff you feel like that finds its way actually into your improvisation? The improvisation is not just the jazz; it's a lifestyle.
That's right. You know, yeah, right. You learn how to improvise doing everything. You know?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Or it's like cooking. I like to dabble with cooking. I'm not a great cook. In fact, I never cook for anybody else, but I cook for myself. But I improvise. I make up my own things, you know, and nothing's killed me yet.
Wow. Can we move up in your career to the time you were playing with some of the great vocalists you've accompanied? Dinah Washington.
Dinah Washington,
Joe
Williams, Johnny Hartman, Jimmy Rushing, Jimmy Witherspoon. Those are the main ones, I think, that I remember.
What was it like working with Joe?
Well, Joe was great. I knew Joe from Chicago anyway. Joe lived, I think he grew up in Chicago. He was born in Georgia. You know, and it was a good experience working with Joe.
Yeah.
I had my trio working with Joe, which was Bob Cranshaw, Mickey Roker, and myself. And we had a good time. We had the same manager, John Levy, and he thought it was a good idea to put the two together. And to solve 2 things, you know. We usually played a short set before Joe came on, and then played for Joe. You know, and that was a good experience. I really liked working with Joe. Joe, I think, is one of the most, well, he's well known now, but even back then, I think he was very underrated. You know, like so many other guys were like just going beyond him. And, I mean, in popularity, I'm talking about, And they tried to brand him as a blues singer, which he didn't want, but he can sing the blues. I love to hear him sing the blues, you know. But he knows how to do everything. He's a good ballad singer.
Right.
Yeah. You know, in fact, I remember we were doing, this was when Mike Douglas had his TV show, and it was coming out of Cleveland then. And we did the show, and then we were watching the show after it was taped. We were watching it in the credits. You know, in the beginning, it said blah, 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 you know, different artists, and featuring blues singer Joe Williams, and he hit the ceiling. He didn't like it. He wanted to be known as an all-around singer.
Yeah.
But at that time, you know, like this was coming off. He was just coming out the Basie band, and he had those big hits every day. All right, okay, you win. You know, and that's what made him really. It was just what John Levy used to try to tell him. You know, but no, I had no problems with Joe or with Dinah. You know, everybody is always asking me, how did you get along with Dinah? Great. I had no problems with her. Wynton Kelly had no problem. I followed Wynton Kelly. I followed Wynton Kelly on 2 jobs, with Dinah and with Dizzy.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, Wynton was my buddy. Yeah. But I never had any problems with Dinah. She gave me complete freedom as to how to play behind her. Like I said, sometimes she would sit down and show me certain chords that she would like. Amazing thing about Dinah had perfect pitch. There were some tunes she would want to start just cold with no intro. And maybe the tune before that was an entirely different key.
Wow.
And she never missed. In the 2 years I worked with her, she never missed.
Wow.
Cannonball also had perfect pitch.
Oh, yeah?
Because he and Nat had relative, is that what they call it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they used to make these little side bets, you know, if a car horn passed and we were sitting in the barracks or something. Right away, Cannon would say, B flat. And Nat said, no, that's B natural or A natural. It would be close. You know? Cannon was always right. But Nat was close enough, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nat told us some great stories about some of his compositions.
Who did?
Nat.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. And I have to tell you, you know, an interviewer isn't supposed to tell his own stories, but I have to tell you that when I was a kid in high school, I used to hide under my sheets and listen to his all-night jazz station. And I saw the same thing in one of your things that you used to do, that listen to Earl Hines. Well, one night this tune came on. It was a piano. It was going da 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 dee da dee da dee da da, and it was just something about this tune. Wow, it's beautiful. And they said, "This is Harlem Lullaby by Junior Mance." And I said, "Oh, I got to get this record." So I got that record, and I have to tell you that tune is just really captured something there. And
Oh, thank you.
can you tell me when you wrote that? And I mean, this must have been in the 60s.
It was
when
in
I
the
heard
60s when I wrote it, yeah.
Yeah.
I just recorded it again on an album that's coming out with a quartet.
Can't
The
wait.
saxophone, Houston Persons on saxophone, and
All right.
Alvin Queen on drums, and Calvin Hill on
Mhm.
bass. And we did it again with the horn.
Wow.
But what'd you say about Under the Sheets? I guess I was about 10 years old, and my dad asked me one Christmas, "What do you want for Christmas?"
Uh-huh.
You know, I said, I want a table radio. You know, this is before they had the battery portables
Yeah.
and all that, you know. And he's shocked. He said, "What the hell does he want a radio for?" You know. Well, they would listen to all the broadcasts at night, you know, like Earl Hines would broadcast from the Grand Terrace. And there was also another place in Chicago, I think, called the Garrick Show Lounge, where I remember Don Bias and J.C. Higginbotham were in a small group there. And they would catch all, you know, that was the days when there were more radio broadcasts than there were records, you know. And but they came on so late, my folks wouldn't let me stay up to listen, you know. But I'd ease up and crack the door, you know, and I'd sit there and listen, you know. So I said, "I'll fix this," you know, and I asked for a radio. So they gave me the radio for Christmas, you know. So I remember I would listen, and the Earl Hines would come on, and I'd search that, the volume down real low till I found it, you know. Then I would get under the covers, you know, with the pillow and all, you know, and listen to it, you know. And every night this went on, and they were none the wiser, you know. And then after it was over, I'd put it back on the table, you know. And after it was over, that was the time, you know, mothers usually come in and tuck you in, you know, fake like I'm sleeping. Well, one night, I fell asleep before the broadcast went off. And radio me and everything, it's under the pillow, you know, sound asleep. So it woke me up, you know, and she pulled the pillow back, you know. And I said, "Oh, this is it. I know I'm going to get it." She called my father in, and they laughed.
Oh, yeah.
They said,
Yeah.
"Look at that."
Great.
So then, after that, they started letting me listen, as long as I was in bed,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and I could turn it on, you know, and listen to it.
I share this with you so you won't feel alone. I used to do the same thing, and my parents asked me what I wanted for Christmas, and I said a transistor radio. And I was a little more discreet because at this time when they come out with the transistor radios, they also had earplugs.
Earplugs.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
And
was saying, Adam,
so they forbade us to listen to music after 11 o'clock. But after 11 o'clock is when all the greatest rhythm and blues would come on.
yeah, right.
And so, you know, we would pretend to be asleep, and we would just before we went to sleep, we would find the station that we wanted, and then we'd turn out the lights and everything else. Sometimes we even have a little flashlight under the covers.
Yeah.
Find that station, you know. So I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah, earphones would have been great in those days, you know, but I had to take the whole radio. That was a small one. I said, I just want a small table radio. And it was about like that. I even remember the name of it, Arvin, A-R-V-I-N. That was the name of the radio. I guess they're out of business now. It was a little small radio.
Didn't you record on a harpsichord too?
Yeah.
On that record?
That was more or less an experience.
That must
yeah.
have been.
It was interesting, but the thing about it, harpsichord is such a delicate instrument. I had to do it on a separate track, then they had to boost it.
Yes.
Oh.
You can't play it along with the rhythm section. It doesn't project enough, you know. So the easiest way, rather than them boosting it while I was playing it, because the rhythm section couldn't hear what I was doing, you know. So I would play it, put it on a separate track, then they boost it loud enough, then get the rhythm section earphones.
How is the touch different from a piano?
Oh man, you just barely touch
There
it.
is, yeah.
You know, and that threw me too. You know, when I first played it, I was playing it with the same touch as a piano. No, you play it very feathery, you know. Yeah, it's quite different. And they don't stay in tune very long, you know. Like if you play it like you play a piano, you got to tune it after every selection. In fact, they had a tuner there that had to tune mine after every take, just to be sure. You know.
Wow.
Yeah. No, we have to play it very lightly.
Wow.
Yeah. And then after that, there were other people that played harpsichord, but they had the electronic harpsichords also.
Yeah.
You know, and there was no problem with that. But even before electronic harpsichord, before I ever did, you remember Artie Shaw in his Gramercy 5? They made a record with harpsichord, and I imagine they must have done the same thing. Who was the harpsichord? I think Johnny Guarneri was the player. Yeah, they had a thing called Summit Ridge Drive where he had this long solo. Yeah, and it was a blues changes on it, and it featured mostly the harpsichord. Yeah, and so I'm sure that's the way they did it then. But that was because that was before LPs. That was in old '78.
Tell us about the first time you heard Bebop. And do you remember?
Yeah, I remember
what
the
your
first
reaction
time I
was?
heard it. It wasn't. Was it on records or not? I think probably the same time. I was in high school, or I just graduated from high school, I think, or maybe during my last year of high school. I think it was during the last year of high school. I really was getting into it, and so there was a saxophone player who was a good friend of mine who was he's really a Lester Young fanatic, and then he heard Charlie Parker. You know, he was telling me about Charlie Parker. Says, "Oh, you got to listen to this," you know. And I went over to his house, and he had these old dial 78s, you know, and he played them for me, and I said, "Wow, I hadn't heard anything like that," you know. So then I had a gig on weekends. I was working with this band that played just they call it traditional swing now, you know, just straight ahead jazz, you know. And nobody played bebop. They played good. The saxophone player was like Illinois Jacket style. Saxophone player like Texas tenor style, which I still love today. You know? And but the bass player, who was the leader, was very anti-bebop. He was really anti-bebop. And in fact, he didn't like the drummer, because the drummer had gotten to the bebop drums, you know, like Max Roach and that. And he used to tell the guy, "Stop dropping those bombs." You know, that was the thing. He said, "Stop dropping those bombs." You know? So one night, two guys came by and wanted to sit in, and one was the alto player, and the other one was a trumpet player. They were young too. They were around my age, you know, maybe a couple of years older. I guess they were maybe about 19 or 20. And so the bass player let them sit in, and the saxophone player sounded wonderful. He was like imitating Charlie Parker, you know, and the trumpet player was playing like Dizzy. the trumpet player, they start calling him Little Diz. You know, and man, I'd heard this and said, wow, you know, and I loved it.
Mm.
And the bass player, oh, he was furious. He said, man, they're playing that garbage. You know, he said, Junior, don't listen to that, man. That'll never go anywhere. He said, that'll just phase itself out quick. You know, so what he was saying just went in one ear and out the other. But I got these guys' phone numbers and I started hanging out with them. You know, and that's when I really got into it. And, you know, and so after this gig was over, I got another gig with the big band in Chicago. It was called Jimmy Dale, which was a pseudo name. There was a Jimmy Dale who was an arranger, but this was not the same Jimmy Dale. Jimmy Dale that used to put out stock arrangements, you know, but this was a different guy. This is a guy named Harold Fox, who had Fox Brothers Tailors. He made all the uniforms for all the bands that were on the road. And the band was like a who's who. The band was, well, you know how they had the Monday night bands here, like when Thad Jones and Mel Lewis used to play at the Vanguard every Monday night. Well, that's the kind of band we were. So Gene was in the band, Gene Ammons. Gene Ammons was in the band. Lee Konitz was in the band. He was from Chicago. Eugene Wright was a bass player. You know, and all the guys were just fantastic players, you know. And we did more rehearsing than playing, but we just loved getting together every week just to rehearse, you know. And we had a book that was out of sight because what Harold would do, Harold was a frustrated trumpet player himself, you know, but he was a good musician. He knew about music. So he would trade bands a set of uniforms if they let him copy like some of the tunes from their book. Like we had tunes from Basie's book. Remember the Billy Eckstine Big Band? We had some of those tunes. We had a couple of Dizzy's tunes. We had a lot of Stan Kenton tunes. And just all of it, and some Woody Herman things, you know, just the book was about that thick, you know, with all these things, you know, all these charts. And we got all these great players, like especially with Gene and Lee, you know, and so we'd get together every week, and the band was like tight and just perfect. In fact, I remember once Stan Kenton came to Chicago to play a dance. Those days they had more dances than concerts, you know, and so we got the gig for the opening act for Stan. So I don't know why Harold did this, you know, with all the stuff we had in the book. He played all of Stan Kenton's charts.
Oh, man.
You know, he called all of Stan Kenton's charts. So while we're playing, you know, like the cats are coming to work out of Stan's band, and they hear the playing, you know. So I looked up once, and they're lined up behind our bandstand, listening, you know. And one of them yelled out, "See, man, that's the way that's supposed to sound." I said, "Whoa!" And you know, and Stan was, he was pissed.
I'll bet.
He was livid, you know. And so the guys came on, and it was funny to the guys in Stan's band, you know. And we played other things too, you know, after a while. But Stan was, oh man, he was really burned because, you know, we played his tunes. So the next night, the band had a layover for a day. We had rehearsal, and Stan's whole band showed up at our rehearsal.
Oh, be darned.
Yeah, just to sit in and play with us at the rehearsal, you know. And then they a lot of little things that they had done different in the arrangements, you know. They showed the trumpets. A couple of the trumpet players were working with the trumpet section, you know. And a couple of the saxophone players the same way, you know. And Stan didn't show up, so I had no help.
That's
You're probably lucky.
That's kind of funny and kind of beautiful also when you talk about the way that information is shared.
Yeah.
Because all the information is really not on the printed page.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and this is what the guys were doing when they showed up. Yeah. And we had a ball. The guys loved it, you know.
Cool.
And also, it's this is something else I'd like you to say a word about, is how the music, when it's played well, creates its own camaraderie.
Yes, yes, that's true. It does. In more than one situation, the same thing would happen on the 100 Gold Fingers tour.
Uh-huh.
The camaraderie that was created, by the way everybody's just really playing, playing good, But but in the case of the band, we were playing and this guy just yelled. I don't even know who it was, but I remember it was one of the guys in the band. He was sort of behind the stands. Says, "Yeah, see, that's the way it's supposed to sound." He said, "Whoa."
He could be looking for a job himself.
He probably did. I don't know if Stan was around then, but Stan got there in time to hear us, playing his stuff.
I want to ask you, of young keyboard artists coming up today, who do you like? Who do you think carries on the tradition, has a good feel, a good grasp
There are a lot of
on
them,
the music?
the young artists today. There's a lot of them. Benny Green, for one, young piano player. And there's another one. What's his kid's name? This heavyset guy. I'll think of his name in a minute. Stephen Scott is another one that I like. And then there are a lot of them who don't have big names yet. There was one I had as a student at the New School, and he's recording. He's recording on Verve now. He's also playing organ, and that's Larry Goldings. He's another one. There's so many of them. I don't know. I listen to everybody, and one thing I don't do much is compare or rate students unless they just can't play, Yeah. But the reason I listen to everybody, I learned this from Benny Carter years ago. Benny Carter came to New York to do a soundtrack for a terrible movie called A Man Called Adam, the Sammy Davis movie. It went nowhere.
Yeah.
But the music was good. Benny did the score for the movie, and Mel Torme was in the movie. And so anyway, we were recording the soundtrack a period of about 3 days, I guess. And so after we finished one day's recording, Ornette Coleman was in town at the old 5 Spot. And so some of the guys, musicians, went by there, and Benny was there. And he was there listening, had his hand on his thing, and he stayed a couple sets. So between sets, one of the guys said, "Benny, what are you doing here? This isn't your type of music." Benny said, "Listen, I listen to everything. It doesn't mean that I'm going to use it or that I like it." He says, "But you have to listen to everything." He says, "You have to be aware of what's going on."
Yeah.
And so I'm the same way. I listen to a lot of things, My likes are very diversified, as far as people I like. Like some of the guys, I really like Archie Shepp, the player. Yeah, I do. Archie says a lot. I don't like all avant-garde music, but there's some that I do like.
Yeah.
But because I'm basically, I guess you might say, straight ahead, bebop, blues, or whatever. But I even tell the students that I say, you listen to everybody. Maybe it's something there you can use. You never know. Maybe it's something you can incorporate into what you're doing. To enhance it more.
Do you have a favorite record of your own?
No.
No.
That's one of my secret ambitions, is to make a record that I like.
Make a record you like?
Yeah.
No.
I don't know. Don't ask me why.
Are you overly critical?
Huh?
You think you're
Of
overly
myself?
critical?
I could be. That's what everybody says, But I don't know. I don't know why I'm like that. Well, I listen to my records like in the studio, and I may listen to like the rough draft of it, like when they give me the cassettes to take home. But when it comes out, I never listen to it. I mean, I hear it by accident, like on WBGO, the
Right.
jazz station or something like that. But I don't play them at home. And I never listen to them.
Huh.
I know when you said about being overly critical, I think I might be because I used to always, I remember when I first started recording, I would say, now why did I do that? Why didn't I do such and such a thing? You know. The only record I really liked that I ever made was my first album as a leader. After that, I don't know, I just didn't like it. My first one was on Verve. It's a record, it's called Junior. I was playing with Dizzy at the time, and Norman Granz was a producer of it. And Dizzy was also with Verve. He produced Dizzy's album, and then we had just done 2 albums. And so Norman, I guess he liked the way I played, and he asked me, he says, how would you like to make a record? I said, yeah, of course. He says, do you mind using Ray Brown? I said,
Oh, well.
Yes.
I guess so.
Yeah, and we had a great bass player too. Sam Jones was a bass player.
Yeah.
So Dizzy, who I really loved, you know, and who I was going to use anyway. But Ray was like, he was the big man then, you know, and we used Dizzy's drummer, a youngster. This guy's only 19 years old, named Lex Humphreys. He was a drummer, you know, and I enjoyed doing that album because Norman was there, and the first couple of things we did, it went down in one take. So Norman was kind of tired that day because he had been doing a million other, I think he'd been recording on some of the other people that recorded on Verve then. And he said, well, you guys really don't need me. He says, you can finish by yourself. So it was just the 3 of us and the engineer. You know, and I enjoyed what I did. You know, I would listen to it, and the engineer said, "Do you like that? You satisfied with that?" You know, and Ray was very helpful. Ray was saying, "Sounds good to me." You know, Ray wouldn't even play solos. You know, and I forced him into playing a solo on one of them. I was playing a slow blues, and while we were playing, I just stopped and pointed to Ray. You know? And it was such a good take at that point.
Yeah.
He had to play, so he played a couple of choruses. You know. But the reason he didn't play, he said, "This is your date."
Yeah.
He says, "Your first one." He says, "You're the star here." Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. And that one I like, but after that, I don't know. I guess I was just very critical about all that I did. The one record I did on India, I was pretty happy with. Not as happy as it was on the first one, only because the producer that I have in India, in fact, he's one of the owners, will only take first takes. He doesn't believe in this take it over, and I love that concept. Everything we did on this album called Softly as in the Morning Sunrise, everything is one take.
Wow.
You know? Because, especially in jazz, like when you're improvising, if you do more than one take, after that, it's downhill. You know, it doesn't get better if you got to repeat, play the same thing.
Right.
Can I ask you a question about that?
Sure.
I know a lot of other jazz musicians who feel much the same way, and so do I. But some musicians feel that, okay, if you take the first take and you're not happy with it, then your mind has already started thinking about whatever measure there was a problem or didn't do just what you wanted it to do or whatever. And then from that point on, you're really not improvising because you've memorized where the problems were, and you're really not flying after it anymore. You're just trying to repair something.
And that's it exactly. You try to get too technical. You know, maybe you fluffed a note, and nobody knows the difference but you know. And by trying to make that, whatever you did, trying to make it perfect, you lose a little of this. You know, some of the heart goes out of it,
Right.
the feeling.
Uh-huh.
And if you keep doing it, the feeling is going, so maybe technically it's getting better. And when it gets to be too perfect, it sounds sterile sometimes.
Or the emphasis completely shifts from expression to execution.
Exactly. That's right. You hit it.
Right.
That's it exactly.
And then it's chamber music. It may as well be written down.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. Because you know, like it's funny. Miles Davis made the statement once. He says, "Man, I don't like Oscar Peterson." I said, "Why?" He says, "Because he never makes mistakes."
Ah,
Which Oscar doesn't. Oscar is flawless when he plays,
Yeah.
all the time. But Miles, Miles made a lot of mistakes, but
Yeah, he knew what to do
so
with
did
them.
Bird,
Uh-huh.
But to us, we figure it was supposed to be like that. It's like Steve Martin when he stumbles and falls. Oh, I meant to do that. Yeah, like you remember, there's a record that's really a classic. When Bird made Lover Man. This is when he was right after that they carted him off to
Yeah.
Camarillo.
Right. Uh-huh.
And because he was losing it,
Right.
This record sounds so great. I mean, the feeling was there. He made a lot of mistakes, but he covered them up. They don't sound like mistakes, And that solo turned out to be a classic. They had more young musicians imitating that solo. Yeah.
Some people even say that you come up with your best ideas when you paint yourself into a corner.
Yeah, sure.
I said, how am I going to get out of this?
That's right, yeah. But our producer, Denji, he says, "I want mistakes and all." He says, "That's jazz." And, the only time he'll take a second take is like if somebody in the booth messes up, or if the tape runs out or something, But other than that, it's like recording live. Now, when Cannonball signed with Capitol Records, like he made a deal with them. He had to put in his contract that all his sessions were going to be live, which, if you notice, most of the Capitol sessions are.
Yeah.
I think this was after one of the last Riverside things he did was a live date, and that was the biggest hit he had.
Yep.
And so everything after that was done live. The last date I did for Angie that I told you I did Harlem Lullaby on, that's live.
Wow.
Yeah. And there's a difference too. You got a different feeling, a different set of emotions when you're playing live.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about that and let you kind of expound on that for just a moment.
Yeah.
That would be, when you play live, do you feel like there is an immediate need for communication to an audience first rather than a tape recorder? Or is there a communal degree of communication going back and forth between you and them?
I think it's more of a communal thing going back and forth. The musician is spinning off of what the audience is giving him. You need that, especially if you've got one that's in your corner all the way. You need that. There's nothing better than that. Yeah. Actually, at least I don't think much about it before I'm playing as to how they're going to react. I'm just happy that they're there. And I figure if they're there because to hear us, and we're going to get a good response. And that's what I feel about it. But when you're in a studio, there's nobody there but the producer, the engineer, and a forest of microphones.
Yeah.
Not much inspiration you can get out of that except playing with the guys, with the rest of the group, But it's not the same, as playing live. And you're gonna make mistakes, but that's jazz. Yeah, But the thing is, a good jazz musician, in fact, it's one of the things I learned from the older guys in Chicago. Well, to put it bluntly, one guy told me, he says, when you make a mistake, he says, forget about it and play right through it. He said, just say to yourself, oops, and keep going. He says, and nobody will know it's a mistake but you. And said, when you make a mistake, make it loud and wrong. Don't make it soft. That way it stands out like a mistake.
Yeah.
Yeah. But if you just make it loud, oh, look what he did there. Oh, yeah, I got to listen to that again, After a while, everybody else will be doing it, like Charlie Parker's Lover Man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One person said, we were talking, I was playing with a band, and we were talking about this same thing. He said, if you make a mistake, play the same thing a third lower. Sequence it.
Yeah. That's an idea. I never thought about that. Yeah.
Now we're going to hear you do that. Well, I'd like
but that's,
to.
that's the joy in playing jazz.
Yeah.
You know, you're gonna make a mistake, and you can turn the negative thing into a positive thing. You know, and I think this is what makes it fun.
Yeah. Well, we've had a lot of fun here today, and I'd like to say that this has all been live, mistakes and all. But it's been a great pleasure sharing your recollections and your views on jazz.
Listen, this has been my pleasure. I really enjoyed it. Really, I wish all interviews were like this.
So on behalf of Hamilton College and Mike Woods, and I'm Monk Rowe, I want to thank Junior Mance for sharing this time with us. It's been really great.
And I want to thank you for having me.
All right.